the beginning of the Second Era in the Frog region. The great demon king Morgoth had just fallen. A young man named Sauron stood before the warriors disguised as orcs and spoke fluently. He was pursuing some kind of supernatural power. Once he succeeded, he would be able to lead everyone back to Middle-earth. Seeing the contempt shown by everyone below, Sauron's tone immediately changed. He believed that in the eyes of the world, disguising as orcs was extremely despicable. If they did not take the initiative to act, they would only be hunted endlessly. These words completely angered the officer behind him. Unfortunately, he had just made a move when he was killed by Sauron in one move. The orcs were temporarily subdued by Sauron's power. For half a day, no one dared to make a sound. At this moment, Adar spoke up. They were willing to honor Sauron as their new leader. Just as Sauron was satisfied and bowing to receive the iron crown that symbolized his power, Adar suddenly changed his mind. Adar used the blade on the crown to stab Sauron. The other orcs also took action while Sauron was injured. One with a knife, the other with a knife. They hacked Sauron to death. Adar was still not at ease, so he went to check it himself. Unexpectedly, Sauron's body emitted a fierce white light. The area of several hundred miles was immediately covered with ice and snow. When everything returned to silence, Adar only saw that Sauron's body had completely melted into blood. Just like that, he became the leader who made the orcs' hearts ache. But no one noticed that Sauron's blood flowed along the ravine and gradually accumulated in the underground cave. Not long after, a mouse passed by the puddle. It was suddenly wrapped tightly by a black tentacle. After sucking enough blood, the black tentacle left the cave. Just as it reached the foot of the mountain, it met a horseman passing by. It sucked hard again. Sauron once again restored his human form. It turned out that he had the ability to regenerate. After a long and arduous journey, Sauron met a group of human exiles. The leader with big eyes and a compassionate face advised Sauron not to go further because the other side of the forest was occupied by orcs. Sauron noticed the badge on the opponent's waist. Sauron knew it was a symbol of losing king, so he changed direction. Sauron followed them across the sea and prepared to find a new refuge. Unexpectedly, they were attacked by sea monsters. Sauron did not save the old man, but stole the badge on his waist. When Sauron fell into the sea, he used his innate instinct to chase the monster away. As a result, only a few people in front of him survived. They drifted on the sea for a whole day. Sauron accidentally met the human messenger who fell into the water, Galadriel. From the time they met and got to know each other, there were a series of events in part 1. After helping the elf family forge 3 elf rings, Sauron's identity was exposed by Galadriel. He could only return to the most familiar land of Mordor once again, but now the great orc army was completely under Adar's control. Previously, Adar had used the erupting fire people to defeat the alliance between the elves and humans. Many human residents were forced to become slaves of the orcs. Sauron looked at Adar in front of him with great hatred, but now was not the time for Sauron to take revenge. Sauron could only use his previous status as a prince to make a deal with Adar. Sauron said that there was a person who had forged the 3 rings. With their supernatural power, Sauron could control the great orc army. As long as Adar released Sauron's people, he would reveal the whereabouts of that person. Adar's heart was shaken. He guessed that person might be Sauron in disguise. Although he really wanted to know the specific information, how could he negotiate with someone who had been captured by humans? Adar had 1,000 ways to make the other party confess. Poor Sauron was just locked into prison. Next to Sauron was a wolf-like ghost staring. The human traitor ran to advise Sauron, but Sauron was not grateful at all. On the contrary, Sauron fiercely threw the bone and signaled the guards to beat him up. After that battle, Sauron picked up the bone on the ground and lured the monster over. Sauron muttered a few words, and the ferocious beast became as gentle as a lamb. Early the next morning, Adar personally entered the prison and saw Sauron's appearance. Adar remembered that he had been chosen as a slave by Morgoth in the past. He was also chained in the prison like that. Now, Adar decided to give Sauron a chance to reveal the whereabouts of the ringsmith and become his subordinate. That request hit the nail on the head. Sauron said that the person was the new face Sauron had transformed into. Sauron could go to the fairies' territory to rescue that person. At that time, Adar led a large army to raise that place and eradicate the threat. Seeing Adar nodded in satisfaction, Sauron bowed and swore allegiance. When the ceremony ended, Sauron was seated and rode away. The human traitor entered the prison and was immediately knocked down by the rat monster. Soon Sauron arrived at a city of the elven clan. The lord of this place was none other than the master blacksmith Celebrimbor, who had forged the elven rings. The human messenger Galadriel, in her elven mode, did not know that her eternal enemy, Sauron, had just appeared. She was in trouble at the moment because she had brought Sauron in human form to the elven clan. She also helped Celebrimbor forge the elven rings. The elven king was extremely angry. Of the 3 rings with holy lightstones, the elven clan only had 3. They had originally planned to use the power of the holy light in the rings to restore the ancient elven tree that was about to wither. Now no one was sure if Sauron had done anything while forging the rings. Elrond thought that he definitely had, so he suggested immediately destroying the 3 rings. But the king was reluctant and said that if the ancient elven tree withered, the elven clan would have to leave Middle-earth. At that time, a species of living beings would be threatened by the demons. After thinking for a long time, the king finally decided to take a risk. Galadriel was of course on the king's side, but Elrond was terribly stubborn. Faced with the king's conservatism, Elrond took the ring and jumped into the abyss. Unexpectedly, Elrond miraculously survived. Elrond immediately went to his friend Sudden. Sudden was also a famous blacksmith. His status was not low in the elven clan. After hearing Elrond's worries, Sudden thought that Sauron was not that strong, but Elrond still insisted that they must destroy the ring, so Sudden had no choice but to agree and decided to throw the ring into the deepest sea crevice. Meanwhile, at the royal palace, the king wrote an order warning the lords under his command to be on guard because Sauron was disguising himself as a human. At the same time, he ordered all the soldiers along the coast to look for traces of Elrond. Galadriel knew her friend best. She guessed that Elrond wanted to destroy the 3 rings, so he would definitely find a blacksmith he knew. The king suddenly thought of Sudden, so he immediately led people to Sudden's house. As a result, they only found Elrond alone. It turned out that Sudden had taken the 3 rings to the sea. After a day and a night of sailing through the waves, he arrived at that sea gulf. Sudden was about to throw the 3 rings down when the ship suddenly shook violently. Out of curiosity, Sudden opened his bag to take out the rings to see. On the other side, the king knew that it would be difficult to recover the 3 rings and that the ancient elven tree was about to wither, so he prepared to announce his departure. Unexpectedly, Sudden returned with great momentum. Sudden still had an elven ring in his hand. Sudden said that these rings contained magical powers. The king was about to pick it up to look at it when Elrond shouted loudly, startling him. A ring rolled to Galadriel's feet. Instinctively, she picked it up and put it on her hand. The king also put on the last one. Immediately, a miracle appeared. The ancient fairy tree sprouted new buds, each leaf shining with a sparkling golden light. After many years, the ancient fairy tree finally revived. The scene changed to another side. The mysterious old man fell from the sky to unseal his memory and power. He led Nori of the Harford clan on the road to the Eregion region. The 2 of them passed through a desolate area and could not find a way out. Food was running out, so Nori begged him to use magic to conjure up some fruit. The old man was confused and told Nori to stay away. When he felt safe enough, he chanted a spell. Sand and rocks wriggled. Nori looked on with increasing excitement. Immediately after, the dry tree exploded. Although it did not bear fruit, countless insects crawled out from the middle of the tree. For Harford, it was a rare delicacy. Nori ate a full meal and praised his magic endlessly. The old man blushed and said it was nothing. He often saw a magic wand in his dreams. If he could get it, it would be truly powerful. At this moment, the old man saw a fire in the distance. His first reaction was to put out the fire. They waited with difficulty until morning. They hid behind a rock. Not long after, a figure appeared stealthily. The 2 of them joined forces to control it and discovered that it was Nori's friend from the Harford clan. It turned out that he had also given up everything and wanted to go on an adventure with them. Knowing that the 2 of them were trapped here, he remembered the records of the elders in the clan. He had passed through this area before. The 3 of them followed the instructions and successfully escaped from the wilderness. Unexpectedly, there was a group of people secretly pursuing them. It turned out that there was a force that had been targeting Nori's group for a long time. Previously, the mysterious woman who wanted to take the old man away was sent by the bearded man. Because the operation failed, he decided to send another group of subordinates to take action. The masked man coldly said that he had found the whereabouts of Istari. He would capture them within 2 days. It turned out that this old man was one of the Istari who shouldered the responsibility of helping humans fight against Sauron. Unfortunately, he was no stronger than ordinary people now. After struggling to escape the wilderness, Istari fainted due to lack of water. Nori and her friends were extremely worried. They dragged him along. Finally, they reached the edge of the desert and found a well. They struggled to pull up a bucket of water. Only then did Istari regain consciousness. At this time, he discovered a dry tree stump on the side of the road that looked like the staff in his dream. Before he could be happy, the masked man had already pulled someone over. Istari didn't have time to think much. Instinctively, he grabbed his staff and chanted a spell. Immediately, the golden sand rose up, forming a giant vortex. The masked man immediately disappeared without a trace. This ultimate move was too great, beyond Istari's current control. The magic wand melted into the sand. Nori and her friends were also swept up into the sky. The kingdom was facing a disaster. They lived in a shelter at the foot of the mountain. But then a rare earthquake occurred because the human king immediately summoned his ministers. Only then did they learned that many ore mines in the Holy Land had been destroyed. Even the land had lost its ability to be cultivated. This clearly showed that there was a problem with the kingdom's mountain range. The crown princess took the initiative to intervene. She decided to sing a rock song to try to establish a connection with the rock god. Unexpectedly, it led to an even larger rock mountain collapse. In a flash, the entire royal city was plunged into enormous darkness. In the capital of the Elven clan, ever since Galadriel and the others put on the 3 elven rings, their peaceful lives were disturbed. In Galadriel's mind, illusions often appeared. The master blacksmith Celebrimbor smiled evilly and told her that the divine sword of wisdom and the Elven clan had lost 3. Galadriel knew it was an illusion, but she felt it was extremely real. Something had happened to the 3 elven rings. Galadriel could not help but worry. She knew that Sauron wanted to rule Middle-earth. He would definitely borrow the power of the rings to control people's hearts. Celebrimbor was his most powerful assistant. The king was also not sure. Ever since he put on the elven rings, he had also seen some strange scenes. The entire Middle-earth was in ruins. The White Tower was covered in dark clouds. Could this be the future? Galadriel took the initiative to ask to leave. She decided to lead an army to Eregion to check on the situation. Sauron's arrival was extremely troublesome. The king also agreed to this proposal, but in order to avoid Galadriel being fooled again, he had to find a capable assistant. Galadriel had already made a choice in her heart. That was Elrond. But Elrond was now discouraged. He thought that the moment Galadriel put on the ring, she would have sided with Sauron. Fortunately, Sudden demonstrated the influence of the elven ring. In fact, the ring was just a tool. Good or evil depends on the user. After hearing this, Elrond suddenly realized. That night, the king summoned Galadriel and announced that he would send 5 elite warriors to accompany her to Eregion. Moreover, Elrond would also participate, but not as an assistant, but as Galadriel's leader. What everyone did not know was that Sauron had already arrived at the gates of Eregion. It was just that the arrogant Celebrimbor did not want to interact with this fallen human king, but Sauron was terrifyingly stubborn. Sauron waited under the city gate all day. Celebrimbor was upset and personally advised Sauron to give up his idea. Unexpectedly, just one sentence from Sauron aroused Celebrimbor's interest. The 3 elven rings that he forged himself had revived the ancient elven tree. This was a coincidence. The king had originally sent a letter to inform this place about the rings and Sauron's identity as the Demon King, but the messenger was assassinated by a mysterious force on the way, so Celebrimbor did not know anything about the current situation. Seeing this, he immediately invited Sauron into the city. Celebrimbor wanted to find out detailed information about the elven rings. Knowing that his work could be compared to the masterpieces passed down from his ancestors, Celebrimbor was so moved that he almost cried. Sauron continued to lie. Sauron thought that Celebrimbor had a chance to surpass his predecessors in blacksmithing. Now the darkness was getting stronger. Only he could forge the Ring of Divine Power to bring Middle-earth back to light. Celebrimbor shook his head. The 3 elven rings were his limit. He had no more ability or materials to forge better rings. As Celebrimbor finished speaking, Sauron's figure suddenly disappeared. Celebrimbor looked around curiously and saw a sudden fire in the forge. A figure slowly appeared. His voice was low and captivating. He declared that he would do his best to help Celebrimbor forge the rings of power. In fact, this person was Anatar, the master of the legendary gifts. Sauron was very good at manipulating people's hearts. His few words made Celebrimbor listen. The 3 elven rings had something happen. Next, he would forge 7 rings for the dwarves. Finally, 9 for humans. Not long after, Durin received an invitation from Celebrimbor to Eregion. He said that there was something to discuss. Durin had a good relationship with the elven clan, so he set off at night. Celebrimbor said that as long as the dwarf kingdom provided enough mithril, he could forge 7 rings of power, enough to restore the dwarf kingdom's mountains, just like the 3 elven rings that healed the elven tree. Durin felt that the 2 elves in front of him had other plans, but this transaction was related to the life and death of the dwarf kingdom, so he did not dare to make a rash decision. He had to tell his father. His father also had a strong dislike for the elven power, but for the future of the kingdom, he could not help but agree. But in another place, the commander of Numenor, Elendil, after suffering Adar's volcanic attack, brought the wounded queen back to the city. They traveled all over the battlefield but could not find any trace of Isildur, so she was forced to retreat with her men. Unexpectedly, Isildur's horse Beric refused to leave. It struggled and ran into the distance. Soon it reached the edge of the Black Forest. It met some orcs on patrol. Facing the surprise attack, the horse still escaped the encirclement. It went deep into the forest. Sometimes it stopped and rubbed against the ground until it entered a dark cave. There, it miraculously found Isildur. He was wrapped in a spider devil. Around him were countless small spiders hiding. Finally, with the help of Beric, Isildur was able to pull out an arm. He had just pulled out his dagger when suddenly the tide orc nearby woke up. The two fought and the Spider Queen woke up. The unlucky orc was immediately eaten. Isildur held the dagger to protect him. Unexpectedly, the Spider Queen was not afraid of death. He was right in front of its jaws. Isildur roared loudly and stabbed the dagger into the spider's head. That was how he had the chance to ride Beric out of the cave. When he confirmed that it was safe, Isildur got off his horse to drink some water. But he saw the corpse of a strange creature floating in a puddle. The Black Forest was indeed no place for humans. Soon, Isildur came across goods scattered everywhere. He thought someone was being attacked. He instinctively went forward to check. Unexpectedly, a blade came from the darkness and attacked him. Isildur grabbed the attacker's wrist. It turned out that it was also a human. The two sides mistook each other for an orc. This girl's name was Ash. She crossed the Black Forest to find her lost fiancé. It was difficult for the two to meet their kind, so they decided to travel together. After crossing the Black Forest, Isildur arrived at the camp of the Numenor soldiers, but it was empty. His father must have returned to the palace. The two had no choice but to continue moving forward. On the way, they met an injured farmer named Shishigu. Ashe felt sorry for him, so she wanted to leave some food behind. Unexpectedly, they fell into a trap. This group of people were all slaves of the orcs. Isildur was almost captured. Suddenly, an iron sword flew towards them. It turned out that Elrond had come to their rescue in time. The slaves were scared and ran away, taking Isildur's horse to escape. Elrond and Isildur had fought together against the orcs. The two returned to the human settlement. Unexpectedly, a funeral was being held there. The dead woman was the only female doctor in the village. She had been hit by an orc arrow. The wound was so severe that she could not survive. Elrond pitifully comforted the doctor's son, Theo, but Theo did not listen. Elrond was furious and swore that he would kill the orcs to avenge Bronwyn. Unexpectedly, the enemy was getting stronger and stronger. In order to deal with Sauron, Adar had recruited many allies over time. Even the Grey Goblins had come to submit. Their large bodies dominated the atmosphere on the battlefield. At this time, Isildur still missed Beric. Theo immediately told him where the slave camp was. The two entered the deep forest and saw a bright fire. Beric was indeed not far away. Isildur was about to untie the rope when the noise attracted the attention of the slaves. They came to check. Theo suddenly appeared and showed his scarred arm and said he was also a slave. Unexpectedly, they realized that this was a fake scar. They intended to capture Theo, but an axe suddenly flew at them, causing the lazy slaves to fall. Theo was lifted up by a huge monster. On the other side, Elendil had just returned to Numenor when he received news of the king's death. Although Elendil was a blind general, he also felt that the kingdom was secretly in turmoil, especially the powerful pharaoh. He forbade anyone to enter Queen Miriel's room. A few days later was Miriel's coronation. He asked her to wear red during the ceremony. He wanted her to submit to him. The queen did not hesitate. She remembered that when her father ascended the throne, he chose white and was congratulated by the great falcon. Pharaoh looked at Miriel coldly. He did not say a word. In the blink of an eye, the day of the queen's coronation came. There were many opponents, including her younger sister Elendil. She brought out the crystal of prophecy. She accused the queen of listening to the dark magic and leading her army to Middle-earth, killing many soldiers. Pharaoh took the opportunity to order the destruction of the elf crystal. Elendil wanted to stop him, but the power inside the crystal threw it away. The people believed that this object was unlucky. When the chaos broke out, a clear cry suddenly came. A great falcon of Numenor appeared. This sacred object heralded casualties. Pharaoh stepped into the middle, approached the falcon. Everyone supported him and shouted his name as if he were the rightful king of Numenor. At the same time, in Eregion, Celebrimbor had begun forging the Ring of Power and was about to finish it. Durin pulled out a piece of mithril. Sauron deliberately held it in his hand before throwing it into the blazing furnace. Galadriel prepared to go to Eregion to investigate Sauron's situation. Accompanying her were Elrond and 4 elite soldiers of the elf clan. The group crossed the forest and mountains, passing through the dangerous peaks. Only when they were blocked by a bottomless abyss did they stop. They looked at the broken bridge. It was definitely not made by human hands. If they went around, it would take another 2 weeks. There was another way, going through the Black Forest, which would save half the time. Galadriel's ring suddenly warned them that the Black Forest contained huge monsters. But Elrond, the leader of the mission, thought that time was of the essence. Even if it was dangerous, they had to try it. Before leaving, he specifically told Galadriel not to rely too much on the 3 elven rings. Unexpectedly, she immediately replied that she just didn't want to see anyone die. The group quickly entered the Black Forest. When they reached an ancient mound, they saw many tombs of ancient kings. A soldier felt a flash of light in the darkness, so he immediately drew his knife. Not far away, Elrond discovered several corpses. The dead were from the elven clan of Lindon. It seemed that the blacksmith Celebrimbor had not received the royal warning. While everyone was discussing the cause of death of these corpses, a soldier was suddenly bound by chains. His body was dragged away very quickly. Galadriel used her power, but she still could not stop the tragedy. Suddenly, Suddenly, the ground around them began to loosen. Ancient corpses rose up one by one. Elrond realized that these were ghosts. Ordinary weapons only shattered their bodies and then regenerated. While everyone was in danger, Elrond thought of a way to break the spell. He crawled into the ancient tomb. Galadriel feared that he was possessed by a spirit. Fortunately, Elrond swung his sword in time to kill the ghost. It turned out that only the weapons they used when alive could free them forever. But everyone still did not understand why the corpses that had been sleeping for thousands of years had awakened. They had lost a comrade. Elrond was extremely regretful. Galadriel was about to comfort her with a few words when her ring warned her. This trip was very dangerous for their lives. Elrond suddenly shouted at Galadriel not to rely too much on the power of the ring. Just then, a comrade reported that they heard the sound of drums in front of them. When they got closer, they discovered that a large number of orcs were crossing the forest. Their direction coincided with their destination, Illusion. Were the orcs planning to start a war with the elven clan? Elrond thought that they should report this news to the king. Unexpectedly, there was movement behind them. Several orcs were chasing a black horse. An arrow flew out and hit a soldier in their group. Everyone was afraid that the orcs would discover them sooner or later. Galadriel pressed her hand on the wound of the person who was hit by the arrow and felt the wound heal itself. She did not expect that the ring could have this effect. She took off the ring and handed it to Elrond. Then she walked out in front of the orcs, only to see her take a few steps and lightly jump onto the black horse. With her skillful skills, she turned the orcs upside down. Galadriel did this to attract attention so that Elrond and the others could escape, but because she fought alone, she was soon captured by Adar. Elsewhere, the villagers on the frontier were searching for the missing Theo. Seeing the axe fall on the ground, they were lost in thought. If they were ordinary bandits, they would definitely not leave their weapons behind, because it was more valuable than gold. Following the trail, Elrond discovered a mangled corpse. The villagers were scared and thought that Theo had been taken by the orcs, only they would eat human flesh. Ars suddenly thought of a place. When she was looking for her fiancé, she had passed through a polluted forest. It was very possible that a large army of orcs was stationed there. This made Elrond suspicious. How could an ordinary person pass through a forest full of orcs? Moreover, he soon realized that the scar on Ars's neck was the mark of an orc slave. It was obvious that Ars and the orcs were on the same side. Without further ado, Elrond stopped Ars and asked her to lead the way to the ORC camp. Soon the three of them arrived at the ancient forest that Ars mentioned. The trees here were devastated by the ORCs. There was mud everywhere. Isildur accidentally stepped into the mud. Elrond wanted to save Isildur, but he was pulled into the mud by a strong force. Ars was scared. She waited for a long time, but did not see any movement. She quickly turned around to look for something. Then she took a branch and stabbed it into the mud. At this moment, a long monster emerged from the mud and stuck its head out. It was about to attack Ars when a sword pierced its belly. Elrond and Isildur rolled out of the monster's belly. It turned out that they had just been swallowed by the monster. After this incident, Elrond realized that Ars did not obey the orcs. Otherwise, she would not have risked her life to save them. Isildur took the opportunity to untie Ars. He also offered to take care of her for the rest of her life. Ars calmly held the iron sword and told Isildur not to be hasty. This slave status would not be recognized by anyone. At this moment, Elrond felt something was wrong. Ars threw away the iron sword. Before she could react, she was struck by a giant tree branch. Seeing that Isildur was about to be in trouble, Elrond suddenly said something and stepped forward. The giant tree man immediately stopped. It turned out that this race and the elven clan were allies. They attacked them just because they smelled metal. Then another tree man appeared. They were the oldest creatures in the forest and had seen with their own eyes the orcs destroying the forest with iron weapons. They were filled with anger. Elrond sympathized after hearing this. He vowed to drive the orcs out of this land. The two tree men were happy and slowly opened the tree branch. Inside were several humans locked up. Among them was Theo, the one Elrond had been looking for all this time. It turned out that he had been captured by the tree man. Isildur did not expect that Ars's fiancé would also be in the group that was rescued. Watching the tree man leave, Elrond turned his back and said goodbye to everyone. He had to go deal with those evil orcs. In another place, Istari was loudly calling out his teammates' names. Because he had lost control earlier, he had blown away the two poor Harfoots. He looked around but could not find them. He met a strange black goat. The goat seemed to have a premonition. It led Istari to a bearded old man. Istari was about to ask when he realized that the terrain here was similar to the land of Ruan that Tron was looking for. Suddenly, the map in his hand flew up. Istari chased it to the base of an ancient tree. Looking at the branch, he remembered the stick in his dream. He was about to reach out and break it when the branch moved by itself. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. Finally, he was swallowed by the tree. Not far away, Nori had just woken up. She quickly woke her friend up. She wanted to find Istari quickly. Unexpectedly, they met a strangely dressed man. He was about the same height as them. Nori felt close to him. It turned out that he belonged to a strong tribe nearby. The two decided to go to their shelter. The man looked troubled. He always told them to be careful, and then he stepped into the giant pile of rocks. Soon they arrived at the strong tribe in the ravine. Seeing this scene, Nori suddenly missed home. At this time, the chief appeared fiercely and asked the man why he brought strangers here. Nori honestly said that they were being chased by a masked man and lost their friend who knew how to use magic. Hearing about magic users, the chief was terrified. Only the black wizard knew how to use magic in this place, so he immediately ordered Nori and her friend to be tied up. Not far away, in the tall building, the black wizard that the clan leader mentioned was questioning Istari's whereabouts. The masked man trembled. He didn't expect that the old man knew powerful magic. The black wizard waved his hand and told his subordinates to focus on finding the two Harfoots. He would personally deal with Istari, but the black wizard didn't know that Istari had been swallowed by the ancient tree. The bearded man muttered something. In a blink of an eye, he pulled Istari out of the tree. Istari was surprised and asked who he was. The bearded man laughed and said that no one had called my name for a long time, because I had appeared before the mountains and rivers were formed. Istari thought he was bragging. Istari just wanted to break off a branch of the ancient tree to make a magic staff. The bearded man didn't answer, but told him to find the ancient tree himself. Then the bearded man opened his mouth and breathed out a flame, transforming into a lamb. Istari remembered that this old man could control the air, the ancient tree, and fire at the same time. He was clearly an expert. Istari quickly begged him to teach Istari how to control magic. He said magic was a part of being a mage. He just needed to prove himself worthy. Istari woke up. This was his destination, the land of Ruan. What he needed to find was not the staff, but the bearded old man in front of him. At that moment, two knights appeared outside the window. Istari recognized them as the masked men chasing him. The bearded old man revealed his secret. It turned out that many years ago, another Istari had come to him to learn magic. That person was the dark wizard who ruled this area. He now controlled most of Eregion. He still desired more. Istari immediately thought that he wanted to cooperate with Sauron in Middle-earth. The bearded old man nodded. If those two joined forces, Middle-earth would be destroyed. Istari wondered why he was so powerful and didn't stop him. The bearded old man smiled mysteriously. He was a herald, not a warrior. The great century had to be completed by the one with the mission. Istari did not understand whether he had to deal with Sauron or the dark wizard. The bearded old man calmly said that he had to confront both. Sauron transformed into the master of the gifts. Sauron joined hands with the master blacksmith Celebrimbor to create the Ring of Power. The human kingdom also took this opportunity to supply the regenerative element and fence. Under the cooperation of both sides, a Ring of Power exclusively for the dwarf kingdom was finally forged. The king was eager to put the ring on his hand and return to the city, then immediately went to the mine. He wanted to drill through the stone pillar. During and the master miner strongly opposed, but he was still stubborn. Seeing that no one listened, he took action himself. The master miner immediately dismissed the miners. Once the mine collapsed, there was no way to save it. The king dug deeper and deeper when suddenly there was an explosion. A ray of sunlight shone through the hole. Durin and the miner shed tears of joy because the earthquake a few weeks ago had caused the light shaft to collapse. The entire kingdom was plunged into eternal darkness. Even crops could not grow. Unexpectedly, when the king put on his powers, he could see out towards the cliff. He just tapped a few places and the sunlight shone. The dwarf kingdom finally saw the light again. The people joyfully shouted the king's name, but the crown princess was worried. She was the one who could hear the singing of the stone mountains. The king's actions were disrespectful to the stone god. When the couple was about to buy a gift for their child, they discovered that the prices had skyrocketed. After asking, they learned that the king had doubled the tax on goods. The crown princess bought a crystal ball. When she turned away, she dropped it. It rolled into the mine. She quickly chased after it. Finally, she came to a giant mine pit. Through her senses of the stone, she quickly found the crystal ball. When she picked it up, strange ripples spread out on the surface of the water inside. Meanwhile, the dwarf king had summoned 6 other lords. According to the plan, the 7 dwarf rings would be held by 7 people. With the power to control the stone, the dwarf tribe would enter a new era. But the king turned around and demanded half of their land before he would give them the ring. The lords left in anger, but the king paid no attention. He continued to point at the map and ordered the master miner to dig deeper. Because the dwarves helped him see all the minerals hidden in the mountain, Durin suddenly came to his father to ask him to stop digging because his wife heard the echoes of the mountain and said that an ancient and powerful demon was lurking under the ground. But the king did not believe him and said that she only heard the mountains singing. As for him, thanks to the Ring of Power, he could see the mountain's vision. For thousands of years they had mined. It was just a drop in the vast pool of minerals. The crown princess was mistaken. At this time, Celebrimbor Celebrimbor did not know what changes the dwarves had made to the king. He was still gloating about his efforts. He also personally erected a monument to commemorate the friendship between the dwarf and the elf tribes. Sauron was the one who had the most advantage. Now the 7 dwarf rings were completed. The next target was the 9 human rings. But Celebrimbor backed down. He helped the dwarf tribe forge the rings because they provided valuable mithril. The humans fought all day long. They were not worth his help. Sauron had a high vision, so he needed the 9 most noble people to hold the rings to rule the 9 human kingdoms. Celebrimbor was satisfied with his current achievements, so he flatly refused this offer. Sauron angrily left and planned to forge the 9 human rings himself. But without Celebrimbor's help, he was almost at a dead end. Now a strange noise came from the forge room. Celebrimbor ran to see and saw the forging tools floating up by themselves. Then the forge exploded. He chased after the iron hammer and accidentally touched a semi-finished ring. Immediately, an elven smith appeared and said that after wearing the ring, he had entered another dimension. There was a fire demon with the breath of the ring coming towards him. Sauron's eyes lit up and interrupted the smith and explained to Celebrimbor that when he forged the ring for humans, he added more accessories. Celebrimbor was about to say that was wrong, but the soldiers warned him that Durin was coming to visit. Durin discovered that since wearing the ring, his father had become cold and greedy. His father had previously promised to give the ring unconditionally to 6 lords. Celebrimbor argued that the dwarves and the elves forged it the same way. How could that be a problem? Durin suddenly asked back, what if the forger was the problem? Celebrimbor was startled and thought of the strange appearance of the gift's owner. He immediately ran to question Sauron if he had played any tricks on the dwarves. Sauron did not expect the smith to be so perceptive. Sauron rolled his eyes and thought of another plan. Sauron said that although the 2 forgings were the same, the spiritual level had changed because Celebrimbor had contained deception when creating the Ring of Power. Now the only way to create a human ring was to balance it. Celebrimbor was surprised. He looked up at the palace where the king was. It turned out that when forging the dwarf ring to avoid the king from disturbing him, Celebrimbor had written a letter to deceive him that the forge was sealed. A few days ago, the king received a letter, but his heart remained uneasy, for the elven ring continued to warn of unrest in Middle-earth. Unbeknownst to him, a vast army of orcs had already been marching day and night and was now about to strike Eregion. Elrond accidentally discovered it, so he immediately abandoned his current mission. He risked his life to rescue Galadriel, who was being abandoned. Then he rushed back to report the news. In the dwarf kingdom, Durin was still advising his father to give up the ring. Even Celebrimbor admitted that the ring had a problem, but the king did not listen. No one could resist the power the ring brought. Durin returned to his room dejectedly. His wife affirmed that the kingdom was about to perish. She told him to absolutely not touch the ring. Celebrimbor was once again deceived by Sauron. He announced that he would forge 9 human rings to match the 3 elven rings against the 7 dwarf rings. Across the sea, in Numenor, a struggle for power had just ended. Miriel had been defeated. The Grand Master had ascended to the throne. His son also boasted that in this life there was no need to strive. The Grand Master did not stop there, but looked across the strait where there was an elven tower that led to the immortal realm. He said that immortality was not the exclusive property of the elven clan. At the moment, Miriel was imprisoned in the tower. Elendil, the Navy Admiral, was displeased. There were many loyal soldiers out there. If the Queen only gave the order, they would help her regain the throne. But the Queen shook her head, because the prophecy stone no longer showed the destruction of the royal city. Perhaps the Grand Master's ascension to the throne would take the country in a different direction. Elendil did not agree, but he promised to restrain himself. The two did not go looking for trouble, but trouble found them. The Queen's loyal navy was dismissed. Even Elendil was no exception. After returning his weapons, he became a commoner. That night, Elendil led the veterans to pray for their fallen comrades. Suddenly, the new prince led his men in and said that there was an order to seal the temple. Elendil tried to hold back and was about to lead the men away, but the man demanded to fix the idol before leaving. Elendil thought it was reasonable. Unexpectedly, the prince smashed the idol in front of everyone. Elendil was furious and threw a punch that knocked the prince down. He was fine with being taken away by the soldiers. The prince tried to counterattack but was stopped. The man was loyal to Elendil and would not accept Elendil's humiliation, so the two sides fought fiercely. Finally, Elendil's subordinate had the upper hand. He avoided the prince's sword. He was about to stab the prince. Elendil shouted to stop. He did not want things to get worse. Elendil's subordinates thought and threw away their swords. Unexpectedly, as soon as he turned his back, he was stabbed by the prince. He fell to his death. Elendil was furious, but he remembered the queen's words, so he let the soldiers escort him away. At the same time, the orc vanguard had crossed the mountain. The elven clan's Eregion was right in front of them. Fortunately, Elrond returned to Lindon in time and reported to the king that Eregion was about to be attacked by the orcs. But the king king did not intend to send troops to rescue him because he could not defeat both Adar and Sauron at the same time. At this time, in the orc camp, Galadriel was captured and imprisoned in the carriage. As soon as the door opened, she calmly stepped down. Adar appeared. Galadriel immediately restrained him. Unexpectedly, Adar calmly said that the two should join forces because they had a common enemy. Arondia quickly passed through the deep forest. Suddenly, he encountered some orc guards. Without hesitation, he shot 3 arrows and easily defeated 3 orcs. Arondia found a map on their corpses, which was the route to the elven city of Eregion. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor was completely unaware of the orc army's arrival. At this time, he was focusing all his efforts on forging the main ring for the humans. However, for some reason, many of his forgings failed. Even the main material, mithril, was exhausted. Celebrimbor was so angry that he lost all his mastery. At this moment, Sauron appeared in time to kindly tell his frantic assistants to retreat. He thought that Celebrimbor was distracted by other matters. Sauron took the initiative to solve the mithril shortage problem and at the same time took over all the trivial matters of Eregion. Purely technical blacksmith like Celebrimbor did not realize that his power as the city lord was being secretly taken away. At this time, someone reported to Sauron that a soldier's body had drifted to the riverbank this morning. The body was engraved with the words, Sauron's corpse transformation. That was the word of the orc disguises. Sauron immediately recognized that this was the symbol left by the orc general Adar. The two sides had previously agreed that Adar would be in charge of hunting down Sauron and then sending troops to destroy him. Sauron stood on the wall and watched the orc disguises army vaguely in the distance. The smile on his face could not be contained. Sauron did not know that Adar had actually seen through his identity long ago. The last time Adar captured Galadriel, he did not kill her, but instead proposed cooperation. Because the two sides had a common enemy, Adar took out Morgoth's crown and said that he had used it to kill Sauron once. Sauron died and came back to life, probably because the crown had lost 3 Silmarils. Those 3 stones had been won into 3 elven rings. Adar wanted to use the elven rings to combine with the crown to completely destroy Sauron. Galadriel was lost in thought. Adar's plan was very feasible, but she was an elf, so how could she cooperate with the orcs? At this time, in the distant dwarf kingdom, the king had become a different person since he had the dwarf ring. He constantly forced the people to mine ores. Durin entered the palace in anger. Durin saw Sauron disguised as an elf coming to demand mithril. Durin instinctively wanted to refuse, but Sauron said they could exchange it for anything. The king refused without hesitation. Seeing Sauron angrily leave, Durin was secretly happy. He thought his father was not so blinded by greed. Unexpectedly, the king had another plan. When Middle-earth went to war, mithril would be truly valuable. Durin was depressed because his father had been manipulated by the ring. When his father turned his back, Durin wanted to snatch the ring. Unexpectedly, he was pushed back by an invisible force. Durin's wife wisely thought that the ring would destroy the king, even the dwarf kingdom. Durin was the prince, so he had to do something. But Durin never thought he would have to confront his father. His wife proposed a compromise. She would stand in front of the mine. If the king sent troops against him, the people would see his father's greed. Durin thought this was the right way. The master miner led his army to the mine. Durin's wife stood alone in front of the mine. Seeing the soldiers about to rush in, she activated her skill. Giant bats flew out of the mine and immediately routed the soldiers. Durin carried his crucifix out from behind the rock and was ready to face more soldiers. The human base, Numenor, was now engulfed in civil strife. The newly elected Grand Master saw Elendil's weakness and immediately demanded a sentence of imprisonment. But the man quickly said that if Elendil swore allegiance, he could pardon him. Elendil refused sternly, saying that Numenor had only one legitimate ruler, Miriel. The Grand Master was furious and had Elendil dragged away. Next to him, the high priest suggested the traditional method of putting Elendil on trial by the sea monster. A woman standing nearby changed color and rushed into the dungeon to advise her father not to be stubborn. No one survived the sea monster trial. Elendil shook his head. His daughter did not understand. He had long been disappointed with his traitor son. The woman stood up and said that the high priest had realized the situation early on. He had also arranged for Miriel to personally attend the sacrifice. Elendil valued not the throne, but the stability of the country. Elendil said that for him to live and abandon his ideals was no different from death. The horn sounded, and the high priest led Elendil to the shore. After the ceremony, 2 soldiers dragged Elendil to the edge of the cliff and were about to throw him into the sea monster. Suddenly, Miriel appeared. According to the law of the land, Elendil had committed a crime because of her, so she had to be tried instead. The high priest could not argue. Elendil had no right to object, so he had to let Miriel go into the abyss. Everyone held their breath and looked at the sea. A moment later, Miriel was pulled down. She saw a giant creature with poisonous eyes stirring. Everyone on the shore waited for a long time without seeing any movement, so they thought Miriel was dead. They were about to make an announcement when a huge wave came and pushed Miriel ashore. According to tradition, whoever passed the sea monster trial would bring prosperity to the country. There was no doubt that Miriel was the true king. The Grand Master was angry and used the knowledge of the elven clan to see the future. He immediately saw Sauron's shadow appear. Across the ocean, Istari went to the Dhen region and found a hidden master. Was taught some fire suppression magic that could help him predict the future. Realizing that Nori was about to be in danger, Istari's heart tightened. The bearded man advised Istari to focus and not think about anything else. Saving people requires strength. When Istari got the staff, the two quickly reached the canyon. They saw countless dead trees. Istari almost cried. Took months to find a branch to make a staff. The bearded man asked, "Is there any other choice?" Istari was worried that his friends were in danger, so he wanted to save Nori and then come back to find the staff. Tom immediately stopped him and said that if he missed this time, he would never find the staff, save millions of Middle-earth creatures, or save Nori's friend. He could only choose one. After saying that, Tom disappeared. Istari was hesitant. Nori was indeed in danger. The masked men of the Dark Wizard were searching everywhere. Fortunately, the strong tribe risked their lives to protect Nori. After the masked men left, Nori decided to leave so as not to implicate them. The chief shook his head and said that in this area, no one could escape the witch's pursuit. Nori was worried and ready to turn himself in. Luckily, he had a fat friend who understood. The wizard needed Nori to threaten Istari. That old man was very important. If he had any uncertainty, it could affect the life and death of Middle-earth. Nori was also troubled after hearing this. At the same time, Galadriel finally made a decision. She told Sauron's entire plot. He was hiding in Eregion to forge a ring of power. He would rule both the elves and humans. Even the ORCs could not escape. The king's army was also coming to Eregion. Joining forces would definitely not be able to control Sauron. But Adar wanted to strike first because the elves were influenced by the ring. They might fight when they met the king's army. As Sauron intended, Galadriel advised Adar to consider. With just that many ORCs, Eregion could not be defeated. Adar did not answer and just told her to look far away. The valley was already full of ORCs. It turned out that Adar had been practicing the alliance for a long time. He blew the trumpet and the ORCs charged forward, preparing to attack Eregion in the first wave. The guards saw the catapults in the distance and immediately sounded the alarm. Celebrimbor in the palace heard the commotion and wanted to go out to see. Sauron stopped him and said that the city was still peaceful. Celebrimbor must have heard wrongly. He was not a fool. He demanded to go out and see clearly. Sauron could not stop him, so he recited a spell. As soon as Celebrimbor pushed the door open, the scene outside became peaceful. Was he really distracted? Sauron appeared relieved and stepped out and said that the urgent matter was to forge a ring. Mithril was scarce, so he had secretly brought it from the dwarf kingdom. Celebrimbor was speechless with emotion. He said that this time he would definitely create a masterpiece that would surpass his predecessors. As soon as he returned to the palace, the scene in the city immediately returned to chaos. Sauron leisurely walked up to the tower and smiled at the ORCs across the river. The plan was progressing smoothly. The ORCs were proficient in controlling the catapults. Each fireball rushed towards Eregion. This method was simple but extremely effective. The city was immediately in chaos. Only Sauron, who was disguised as an elf, remained calm and composed. His purpose in coming here was only for power. The life or death of the city was not important to him. At this moment, an elven deputy ran over to ask why Celebrimbor did not give instructions. Sauron pretended to frown and said that Celebrimbor did not want to counterattack. As soon as he finished speaking, the orcs' stone throwing suddenly stopped. It turned out that they had ordered Adar to send the catapults to aim at the mountains along the river. Each stone bullet was fired, and the towering mountains collapsed one by one. The dam at the foot of Lamha Mountain quickly collapsed. When Arandia ran from afar, he saw the moat around the elven city turn into mud. It was clear that the city gate was about to enter a bloody battle. But in the eyes of Celebrimbor, who was under Sauron's illusion, the scene of the collapsing mountains and flooding water became peaceful and quiet. He put all his mind into forging the 9 rings. Sauron was very pleased with this performance. Every time he came, he asked when it would be finished. From Sauron's tone, Celebrimbor realized that something was wrong. The owner of the previous gifts was not in such a hurry. He saw the old mouse appear again. He was moved to draw a mark on the candle. At this time, drums and gongs sounded outside the city. Orcs rushed forward with all their might. Elf warriors held firm on the city wall. Thanks to their skillful archers, they barely held out, but they knew they could not last long, especially when they saw the orcs pushing out the siege engines. All the archers were focused on it. In the dwarf kingdom, the king, although receiving a letter of support from the elves, ignored it. On the contrary, he urged the miners to dig quickly. The king said that if Durin blocked the cave entrance, he would kill Durin himself. The miner agreed on the surface, but when he left, he immediately reported to Durin. He said that the king had lost interest in the ring. After Durin Durin's incident, he had to take charge of the situation. But first, he had to meet an elf messenger. Unexpectedly, the person who came was Elrond. Hearing that the elf city and Middle-earth were in trouble, Durin promised that he would send reinforcements. At this time, Celebrimbor in the elf city also noticed something unusual. The mouse kept appearing and repeating the same route. The candle did not burn at all day. He concluded that he was fooled by an illusion. Sauron quickly explained that he just wanted to create a quiet space. Celebrimbor burst out laughing and threw the side of the forging hammer at the window. The noise of chaos on the battlefield immediately entered. Sauron's magic dissipated. Celebrimbor turned back in panic when he saw the elf city in chaos during the war. The entire palace was also in ruins. He looked at Sauron in horror. He suddenly understood that the forging of the rings was also a lie. Sauron's hand was dirty. It turned out that the main ingredient for forging the rings was the blood of the dragon. At this moment, Celebrimbor confirmed that the owner of the gifts was Sauron. As soon as he stepped out of the palace, he was hit by a bullet. Ignoring the wound, he passed the arrows and went to his deputy. He said that Sauron had deceived them all. Before the deputy could reply, Sauron calmly walked over. Celebrimbor ordered the soldiers to arrest him, but the soldiers did not move because when the Lord was absent, the owner of the gifts had commanded them to fight the enemy. The deputy intended to help Celebrimbor back to rest. Sauron secretly played a trick so that the deputy fell off the wall. Celebrimbor was suspected, so he lost all command. Sauron whispered to him that if he forged a ring of power, he would spare the elves in the city. At that moment, trumpets sounded from the battlefield. King Jugalas's relief army had arrived. Jugalas and Elrond led their soldiers like a flood towards the orcs. But Adar was not afraid because Galadriel was still in his hands. Jugalas quickly ordered the army to stop. In a flash, Elrond entered the orc camp. Turned out that Adar wanted to negotiate with the elves. Now that both sides had a common enemy, they should join forces to destroy Sauron. But Elrond saw that the orcs were attacking the elven city, and the pride of the elven family did not allow him to compromise. Adar had to take a step back and asked to use the elven ring in exchange for Galadriel's life. Elrond continued to refuse before turning away. He took off the medallion on his shoulder and used it as an excuse to refuse Galadriel. When the two embraced, he discreetly slipped the medallion to her. Leaving the camp, the deputy general asked how they would deal with the 10 times larger orc army. Elrond said that Durin would come to the rescue tomorrow morning. They just needed to hold out overnight. The urgent task was to destroy the orc siege engines. Elrond volunteered to lead the charge through the enemy. Although the orcs kept pouring in, their destructive power was significantly reduced. Adar saw the problem and ordered more siege engines. When he returned to the tent, he discovered that Galadriel had escaped. Elrond's medallion was left not far away. At this time, Galadriel disguised herself as an orc and sneaked deep into the enemy camp. Unexpectedly, the orcs also held a funeral for their fallen soldiers. Galadriel was surprised and was about to fall when an orc saw her hair and felt sorry for her. She was about to be exposed. Suddenly, an arrow flew towards her. Galadriel quickly climbed up the hole. It turned out that Arondir had come to save her in time. Galadriel was overjoyed. Finally, she could enter the elven city to seek revenge on Sauron. At this time, Celebrimbor was forced by Sauron to continue forging the rings of power. When Sauron left, he took out the 9 rings and intended to throw them into the furnace. Unfortunately, he waited for dozens of minutes, but the 9 rings did not melt. Now the only way was to get the rings out of the city. Absolutely not let them fall into Sauron's hands. But Celebrimbor was tied with a rope made of elven roots. His hands were tied with chains. He had no choice but to use a knife to cut off his thumb and escape with the 9 rings. He had just taken a few steps when he was shot. When he regained consciousness, he was discovered by some patrolling soldiers. They intended to take him back. Galadriel blocked the way. She had seen that Sauron was good at deceiving people. Seeing Celebrimbor seriously injured, she sincerely comforted him and wanted to take him away from here immediately. But Celebrimbor shook his head firmly because he had to take the ring of power away immediately. After saying that, he gave the ring to Galadriel, and as lord of the city, he could not abandon the city and run. He said that light would dispel darkness. He returned to the palace with his soldiers. Outside, the battle had entered a fierce phase. Cannon shells continuously rained down on the city walls. The elven soldiers led by Elrond were also exhausted. An elven archer was shot by many arrows, but she still tried to hold on. She used her last arrow to hit the kerosene barrel next to the catapult. This heroic sacrifice encouraged her comrades to fight the orcs with all their might. Adar saw that the situation was unstable, so he made his final move. The orcs scattered. A giant monster appeared, tall and majestic. Even the elven cavalry could not shake him. The arrows that shot out did not hurt him. He was truly a god killer on the battlefield. Elrond risked his life to slash the chain and throw him away, but it only caused minor injuries. He stood up and controlled the wall-breaking tool. Fortunately, Jugalas rode up and took the opportunity to cut him down. Elrond and Jugalas continued to join join forces, and finally the monster fell. Adar, who saw it from afar, was very angry. He ordered a general attack. Jugala's army was very small. The sun had risen, but the dwarf reinforcements had not arrived yet. At this time, a seriously wounded soldier reported that the dwarfs could not arrive. Elrond fell into deep thought. He muttered that Durin had never broken a promise. He did not know the situation in the dwarf kingdom. Durin planned to march very smoothly and was supported by the ministers and the people. Everyone had been dissatisfied with the king for a long time. Durin gathered 10 soldiers and was about to set off when the master miner reported that King was digging madly. He intended to release the monster that Durin's wife had warned him about. There was no other way, so Durin had to stay to save the situation. Otherwise, the country would be lost. Jugalas accepted the reality that was to face the orcs. He shouted loudly to form a battle line and led the few remaining soldiers to charge into the enemy sea. After all, fists were no match for knives. Moreover, Adar was very powerful. A few moves had already killed the soldiers. Worse, the sturdy walls collapsed under the attack. Countless orcs howled and rushed into the city. Eregion lost the protection of the wall. The guards were scattered and were continuously surrounded and divided by the orcs. Galadriel led a group of women to risk their lives to break out of the siege. Finally, they escaped from the city through a secret tunnel. But she did not expect that right at the exit, there was a pair of orcs waiting. Galadriel jumped out. She was willing to use her life to exchange for the freedom of the women. She also had 9 human rings on her. Meanwhile, Celebrimbor, in order to cover Galadriel's escape, took the initiative to return to his palace. As soon as he saw Sauron, Celebrimbor ordered his guards to rush forward and arrest him. But Sauron's power was beyond imagination. Sauron could manipulate soldiers to kill each other. Celebrimbor once again became a fish on the chopping block. Sauron continuously shot several arrows, but deliberately avoided vital spots. His purpose was to save Celebrimbor's life and force him to ask for the whereabouts of the 9 human rings. Celebrimbor did not reveal anything. Celebrimbor also cursed that one day Sauron would be destroyed by one of the rings. Sauron was patient, so he immediately stabbed Celebrimbor through the body. Celebrimbor died on the spot. At this time, several disguised orcs rushed into the palace. As soon as they saw Sauron, they lost all courage to fight. The deputy leader, as if under magic, obediently gave his name. In the dwarf kingdom, Durin heard that his father was mentally ill, so he immediately went into the mine. His wife angrily said that the king had become a slave to the ringwraith. Durin took a deep breath and decided to die. Going deeper into the mine, he saw that the king was still digging tirelessly. Durin angrily raised his axe and threatened to cut off his father's hand. The king calmly turned around and said, "You really dare to swing your axe at me?" Durin was like a child whose heart had been hit. The axe in his hand kept shaking. The king continued to dig naturally. Suddenly, the stone wall in the mine was punctured. The king called Durin to come and see. This was the real wealth of the dwarf kingdom. Durin hesitantly stepped in. Before his eyes was a vein of mithril sparkling with light. The king slowly said that only when he wore the ring could he see everything. Middle-earth was about to be in chaos. The dwarf kingdom could protect itself with this mithril. At that moment, the bottom of the mountain glowed red. A whip of fire appeared. The beast buried underground appeared. With a wave of its hand, it threw Durin away. The king seemed to have foreseen this. He put down the dwarf ring, picked up the axe, and told Durin that he was strong enough to be the dwarf king. After saying that, the king turned and slashed at the Banra. Finally, the king exchanged his life for the temporary crushing of the unstoppable monster. This also helped the dwarf kingdom have a brief peace. At this time, Galadriel was brought before Adar by the orcs. On her hand, she wore an elven ring. It was the one that had been taken from Elrond. Thanks to that ring, the scar on Adar's face was gone. But Adar also saw the terrifying future. At this moment, Adar seemed to have changed. He took the initiative to return the ring to Galadriel, hoping that this could resolve the hatred between the orcs and the elves, because only then could they completely destroy Sauron. Galadriel, wearing the ring, was about to ask Adar what he saw when an orc disguised as his lieutenant came forward and reported that he had refused Sauron's temptation and was so badly injured. Adar bent down to comfort his lieutenant. Without warning, a knife was stabbed into Adar's stomach. It turned out that these orcs disguised as his subordinates were all enchanted by Sauron. That was why Adar died so tragically at the hands of his subordinates. Sauron calmly appeared and ordered his lieutenant to quickly destroy the elf city, but to keep a few important people to interrogate the whereabouts of the ring. Seeing the orc obeying his orders and leaving, Galadriel stepped forward and questioned that it was all arranged by him. Sauron did not answer, but picked up the metal crown on the ground and avoided the sword slash behind his back. Galadriel had a hard time meeting her enemy, so she did not hesitate to kill him. At this time, the elf city was completely devastated. Elrond and Arondir were escorted by the orcs to the square. They watched the statue of the elf goddess collapse. Their hearts were cut like knives, but what was even more cruel came next. Next, the orcs decided to burn all the books of Celebrimbor. Elrond cried and begged. The orcs lit the fire with joy. Seeing each book burned in the fire, the elves lost their souls. Not far away, the battle on the mountainside had entered a fierce phase. Galadriel almost abandoned defense. She only wanted to inflict more wounds on Sauron, but his power was strange and unpredictable. He often changed his form. Seeing that he had captured the demon, Sauron finally revealed his true feelings. He said that his feelings for her were true. When he united Middle-earth, he would make her his queen. Galadriel coldly used a knife filled with anger to reply that Sauron would no longer pretend. He forced her to the cliff edge of the mountain. The crown in his hand stabbed down violently. Galadriel mustered her last strength and said that the lives in Middle-earth would resist to the end. Sauron's face was covered with blood. He slowly picked up the human ring on the ground. Suddenly, a trumpet sounded at the foot of the mountain. It turned out that the dwarven army had come to support. Arandi and her comrades fought back desperately and quickly joined forces with Prince Doran. On the mountainside, Galadriel had hope again. She knew that Sauron wanted the remaining elf ring, so she held the ring in her hand and let herself fall to the foot of the mountain. This scene was just seen by the king and everyone else. The defeated orc deputy ran to report that the elves had escaped. Sauron angrily ate him to death. At that time, the king found Galadriel dying. Unfortunately, relying on his elf power alone could not heal the wound caused by the darkness. When Elrond saw this, he silently picked up the elf ring on the ground. This time, he also had to borrow the power of the ring. On the other side, Istari was extremely hesitant. The mysterious bearded old man said that there was a mark of his wand in this forest, but if he went to look for it now, he would miss the chance to save his friend. Thinking back and forth, Istari followed his heart. When he arrived at the Harfoot tribe, where Nori lived, the dark wizard had captured his soldiers. Istari insisted that he had not met Adar, but the dark wizard claimed to be his old friend. The five of them were advised by Istari before. Now, Oran is looking for strength to fight Sauron, but he did not believe it. If they were his friends, why did they capture Nori? The dark wizard pretended to be surprised and said that his subordinates were too cruel. Then he used his stick to push the masked man against the cliff. Nori and the Harfoot tribe were freed. The chief said that this wizard was oppressing them. The dark wizard quickly explained that he should not pity weak creatures. Istari asked, "Then how am I different from Sauron?" The black wizard impatiently said, "I will leave you no choice." He swung his staff. The rocks above his head shattered. The chieftain screamed. The clan ran screaming. Istari was worried. He raised his hands. The falling rocks stopped in midair. This action saved many Harfoots but destroyed their homes. Nori thought she was a disaster. She wanted to lead the Harfoot clan to a new hideout. That meant she had to say goodbye to Istari, who had his own way. Watching his friend leave, he picked up a dry branch from the rubble and felt strangely familiar. Returning to the tall, mysterious man's hut, he understood that it was a test. He had chosen friendship over power, and that was why he had been given the staff. The bearded man smiled and said, "Welcome back, Jendal." In a border town of Middle-earth, the son of the chieftain Isildur decided to return to Numenor. Ars came to see him off. She unintentionally revealed that she had no feelings for her fiancé. Isildur was moved and promised he would take her back to Numenor. He did not expect that the son of the Grand Master would lead the army to establish a future for humanity here. He met Isildur and immediately ordered Isildur to board the ship, leaving Ars behind to worry. It turned out that although Miriel had been recognized by the sea, she had not yet truly taken power. The Grand Master went crazy and forged a letter from Sauron. From there, he falsely accused her of colluding with the Demon King. He wiped out her loyal faction. The city was in chaos. Elendil asked his daughter to help him hide from the soldiers. He secretly reported to the queen and planned to take her to Middle-earth. The queen shook her head and gave the sword Naso to Elendil and told him to go to Middle-earth to find an opportunity. The city was in ruins, but humanity could not lose hope. At this time, Galadriel woke up from her coma. Seeing the king rallying his troops, her heart was filled with determination because of what Celebrimbor had said. Defeat darkness, not by strength, but by the light everywhere. They will gather all allies and challenge Sauron once again. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching the movie. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.